Thank you very much, Tamás, for this very interesting overview of the evolution of the concept of just war by the church. Our next panelist is a priest, Reverend Dr. László GÁJER. So he's a Roman Catholic priest ordained in 2008, and he is also a strong academic career with the Catholic Church of Pázmány Péter. He obtained 2 PhDs, one in theology and the other on humanities. And his today's lecture will be about, he will explore in this today's lecture the pro-peace message of Andrea Riccardi and its influence on the pontificate of Pope Francis.
Many thanks. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you for your attention after the lunch. After a well-prepared lecture about the roots and principles of the just war theories, Professor Nyírkos finished his lecture with the everyday life and with consequences of the everyday life, and from this point I can continue my lecture, my presentation with the everyday life, because I don't want to speak for you about a very strict academic issue, but I want to explain you something from my own experience about the community with which I celebrate the Holy Mass every Sunday, almost every Sunday, and I would like to speak about the experience of this community, Sant'Egidio, and I would like to share with you some thoughts from the books and from the ideas of the founder of this community, his name Andrea Riccardi. I want to ask you, is somebody here who knows or who heard at least the name of the community Sant'Egidio? Or it is absolutely new for you? Almost absolutely new. Okay, I try to explain in this way. So the Italian professor Andrea Riccardi, he's a professor of history in Rome, founded the community of Sant'Egidio in Trastevere, Rome, in 1968. This is a Catholic community. The community defines its mission, as Pope John Paul II aptly put it, by the so-called 3 P's, the initials of the words peace, prayer, and the poor, pace, preghiera, e poveri. Standing up for the poor is therefore as important in the life of the community as the mission of peace. These 2 purposes flow from prayer. This community is an international Catholic community based in Rome, but is present in 73 countries with more than 50,000 members and activists all around the world. So Riccardi's books on peace can also be seen as statements on certain major historical events. Thus, La Pace Preventiva, Preventive Peace in 2004, is an assessment of the war in Iraq, and Il Grido della Pace, Cry for Peace 2023, is a volume written in response to Russian aggression against Ukraine. Nor should we forget the books La Forza Disarmata della Pace e La Scelta per la Pace. In this presentation, I will try to summarize, on the basis of these books and Riccardi's articles and lectures, the pro-peace message of the historian and community founder, which has had such an impact on the pontificate of Pope Francis, and which has also become a source of concrete peace missions in Africa or Ukraine, for example. In his autobiography, Hope, published shortly before his death, Pope Francis writes on the war, I quote him, "What else does a war leave? Injustice added to injustice. War is stupid. People have almost always understood this. People are not stupid." That was the quotation. Pope Francis' pro-peace stance is also evident in these few lines. He was firm and consistent on this issue, rightly rejecting the term just war. As an important source of Pope Francis' vision, I would like to present the views of Professor Riccardi. Our author writes and lectures mostly in Italian, and his ideas are therefore best known in that language. Their impact both because of the attention of Pope Francis and because of the influence of the international community founded by the professor Sant'Egidio, is worldwide. The community of Sant'Egidio, the community of Sant'Egidio has been involved in peace work in many countries, including Mozambique, and more recently in the crisis of Guatemala, Albania, Algeria, Burundi, Togo, Niger, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Senegal, Uganda, Libya, Cameroon, North Korea, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Colombia, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, Ivory Coast, Liberia, and Yemen. The community of Sant'Egidio has been actively involved in health diplomacy against HIV through the DREAM project and humanitarian diplomacy against the death penalty. The community of Sant'Egidio started the Sant'Egidio Foundation for Peace and Dialogue in October 2019, based on New York City. This work is also key to the spirituality of the community. However, the establishment of institutional channels for these processes has created the possibility for the dream of peace to become a reality rather than a dream. The community of Sant'Egidio is recognized by the Holy See as a lay public association. As a non-governmental organization, the community has consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. On 9 June 2017, it signed the Memorandum of Understanding with the United Nations Department of Political Affairs. The community aims to support the peace mission with appropriate scientific background work. To this end, conferences and workshops are regularly held in Rome. They develop online materials. Pope John Paul II invited representatives of Greek religions to Assisi in 1986 to witness together for peace. Since then, Sant'Egidio has been particularly involved in the organization of these days of prayer for peace in major European cities. While the community strives to develop a wide and diverse range of contacts between cultures and countries in the Mediterranean. The outstanding achievement of the community's peace mission is the peace treaty signed in Rome on 4th October 1992, that is the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. The community mediated between parties. The treaty was signed by the president of Mozambique and the opposition leaders who controlled the guerrilla groups. This general peace agreement brought an end to a 17 years of civil war in the country, which has killed hundreds of thousands of people and has made almost 4 million people refugees who have fled to neighboring countries. The community's mission of peace in South Sudan, the youngest country in the world, created in 2011, will be remembered. In April 2019, when Pope Francis accepted the leaders of the country in the Vatican, he bowed down and kissed the feet of the opposing politicians. This is also recalled in the Pope Francis's autobiography, in which he remarks, I quote him, "Peace is possible. I will never tire of repeating it. It is the fundamental condition for respecting the rights of every human and for the full development of every nation." That was the quotation. The Pope did so while the political leaders were taking part in a silent retreat organized by Sant'Egidio and led by Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, as a sign of the end of an armed conflict that has been going since 2013. The community's initiative is called the Rome Initiative, which aims to promote the total peace in the country. The first book about I would like to speak a little bit is La Pace Preventiva, the preventive peace from 2004. This book was a reaction to the war in Iraq. The US attack on Iraq is often cited as an example of traditional just war theories. America's argument was based on the preemptive attack to prevent the use of nuclear weapons. This argument was largely accepted by the world public opinion at the time. However, it should also be remembered that John Paul II consistently condemned the intervention in Iraq, sending Pio Cardinal Laghi to the United States president on the eve of the outbreak of war. Laghi warned President Bush that a war is easy to start, but extremely difficult to end. United States finally attacked Iraq on 20 March 2003. And while the United States bishops sent letters condemning the plan to intervene, American Christian opinion, public opinion, including the highly respected Richard Neuhaus, was not intended in its support for the Pope, with many suggesting that he might not be well versed in the traditional moral teaching on just war. In the same weeks, Andrea Riccardi published an article on the ethics of war in which he wrote of about two Christianities, stressing that the Catholic positions condemned the US invasion of Iraq, while President Bush was encouraged and supported by neo-Protestant tendencies to launch the intervention. Pope John Paul II's position on the war in Iraq was well-founded and personal. His stance had a strong and direct impact on public opinion and was shared by the historical churches, including the Orthodox, Protestant, and Anglican communities in this time. Shortly afterwards, similar statements were made by the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Istanbul, the Anglican Primate, and the Patriarch of Moscow. Only the British and American administrations, surrounded by mainly evangelical Christians and neoconservative thinkers, differed. Unfortunately, evangelical communities looking at America as a paraphrase of biblical narratives have argued that the war in Iraq is a holy war. In his book, Andrea Riccardi quotes the 19th century Whig politician Henry Maine, "War is old, ancient as mankind, but peace is a modern discovery. And Michael Howard, then, the opposition conservative leader in the UK, "The culture of peace is a recent phenomenon." Riccardi's position is not simply pacifist. His conviction and commitment to peace are both deeply human and deeply evangelical. Has war always been a faithful companion of human history? This is the question. Yes, we know many states have been born out of war or have defended their freedom through war. We know that. But is war an inevitable companion of human history? After all, today we are leaning towards the idea that war in the end is inevitable. But how much does our and others' desire for peace count? One cannot avoid saying bitterly, very little, I think. The decision is effectively in the hands of a few. The realization is at the root of the frustration of many who have demonstrated and protested for peace. But for us Christians, Riccardi argues, peace is not a contingent political choice. It is something rooted in the meaning of life and in faith itself. Peace is at the heart of being Christian and of being men and women. So the message of this book is peace is possible and necessary. It is an anthropological, and its anthropological and evangelical foundations are absolutely clear. The second book about I would like to speak a little bit is Il grido della pace, The Cry for Peace, 2023. Andrea Riccardi is a historian, and he covers his subject with the thoroughness of a historian. His thoroughness is also evident in this book, in The Cry for Peace. That was after, this publication was after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There is no time to go into the details of this research, so I will instead present the author's theoretical considerations only. It is interesting. At the end of the book, Riccardi evokes Voltaire's idea of permanent revolution with unusual courage. Unusual courage. Therein lies the soul of Europe, he says. At the heart of long-term European history is the process of developing political pact, but The roots of this process lie in this revolutionary tension as well. Revolutionary tension, prophecy, utopia, and vision are inextricably intertwined. Talking about it might seem nostalgic in today's Europe, allergic to tension, worried about being challenged by the history around us, often driven to close in on itself. Today, we are faced with an exhaustion of this tension, producing visions of the future. But is the West possible without utopia? This is the question of Andrea Riccardi. Visions require hope, imagination, risk, faith, trust, and investment in the future. Peace is a dream, and the path to peace is the encounter, the dialogue. Dialogue, I quote Riccardi, is not an expression of goodwill, something inherited from the post-conciliar Catholicism. It is not an unprejudiced negotiation with all people asking just to be left in peace in order to increase our own quality of life. Dialogue is the ability to look the other person's differences in the face, to try and develop more ways of relating to them, to weave a pattern of relationships, and to gain a grasp of the interests and attitudes of the other person. The remainder, by which I mean the future, means taking the historic risk and knowing at the same time that nothing is certain. That was the quotation. So dialogue is important, and dialogue is not without risk. But without dialogue, there is no peace. This is the stance of Andrea Riccardi. Pope Francis also notes in this autobiography that our illusions about the so-called end of history were swept away by the war in Ukraine. It is possible that we do not agree with the perverse, illogical logic of the war. These were the words of Pope Francis. So, this requires of revolutionary courage of dialogue. This requires of revolutionary courage of dialogue. This is our vision, and this is our utopia. This is the idea of Andrea Riccardi, or the proposal of Andrea Riccardi. And last one, I would like to speak shortly about this short booklet, La forza disarmata della pace. The Force Disarmed of Peace. Yeah, this is the title. This is only a booklet, and Andrea Riccardi wanted to start a movement with this booklet. In 2022, Pope Francis published a book, Contro la guerra, Il coraggio di costruire la pace, Against war, Courage to build peace, and he wanted to summarize his teaching on war, and whose message is in line with the principles just outlined. In these non-doctrinal statements of the Pope summarizes the experiences, inspirations, and principles that have led him to a total commitment to peace. He mentions his trip to Iraq in March 2021, where he experienced firsthand the consequences of the war. He uses the image of the so-called Third World War in pieces, which he has often refers to, and touches about the war in Ukraine. He refers to Pope John XXIII, 9062 appeals to world leaders to curb escalation of armed conflict, and recalls Pope Paul VI, 1976 speech on the United Nations, quoting the Pope's famous words, "Never again war, never again war." And Pope Francis' words in this volume should strengthen us. I quote him. Peace happens every day. Peace is a handicraft, a work of man with his hands, with his life. If someone asks me, tell me how I can do this and be a craftsman of peace, the first thing I answer is never hate. And if someone does wrong to you, try to forgive, not hatred, only forgiveness. And if there is no hate in your heart, if you forgive, you will be a winner, because you will be victorious in the most difficult battle of the life, love. And through love comes peace. That was the quotation from Pope Francis. Andrea Riccardi often quotes a short sentence of John Paul II, and this is the title of his 2018 interview book with Massimo Naro. The sentence is "Tutto può cambiare." Everything can change. Peace is always possible. Because, for example, no one accepted a Polish pope to come from a communist country, just as no one accepted a 76-year-old prelate from Argentina to open an era that would be the age of the universal church, the church of the southern hemisphere and the church of the periphery. God always surprises us. If nothing in history is predictable, this is even more true in the space of grace. The history of Christians is not determined, and God sometimes writes straight in crooked lines. So peace is always, in every situation, is possible. In this booklet, Riccardi calls for the creation of a movement to promote the culture of peace. I quote him. We need to grow spaces for peace in society, to connect, indeed ally, the circles and groups that are sensitive. First of all, each civil subject, such as local institutions or cities, must multiply its relations. Today, not only nations, but cities and many other communities can be a subject in the global world. Institutional actors and communities can create a network to build relationships for peace in the world. That was the quotation. So we are invited. Movement, commitment, revolutionary tension, utopia, these are necessary to deepen the spirit of dialogue. And dialogue is the path to peace. Dear guests, dear friends, I wish you all an adventurous journey. Thank you for the attention.